I paid for a family vacation. Then my dad smirked and told me they'd already taken the trip without me because it was only for family. So I looked him in the eyes and said, that was the last trip you had. My name is Robin Chandler, and the moment my father smirked at me, everything I thought I knew about family collapsed. I had asked a simple question about the summer vacation I'd spent $36,000 on. The trip I believed would finally pull us back together after years of me holding everyone up. He didn't hesitate. He didn't blink. He just said it almost amused at how easily the words cut. We already went last week only for family. I stood there frozen, hearing the sentence replay in my head long after he ended the call. Only for family, as if I had never belonged in the first place. The money I drained, the plans I built, the hope I held on to, none of it mattered. Someone had made sure my name was never on the booking at all. The trip I paid for became the trip they used to erase me. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I just let the silence settle, because sometimes silence reveals the truth faster than confrontation ever could. And the truth was simple. I wasn't invited to the vacation I paid for, and that meant something in my family had already broken long before that call. 2 months later, when another request came, the rent needing help again, the same pattern repeating like clockwork, something in me finally shifted. The words he once used to exclude me became the only ones I had left to give back. Only for family, remember? I said it calmly, almost gently, even though everything that followed would be anything but gentle. Before I tell you what he said and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. Long before that moment, my life in Austin already revolved around numbers. After my divorce, I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city. I took a financial analyst role at a mid-sized tech company buried in spreadsheets and forecasts. On paper, it looked like stability, steady paycheck, health insurance, a desk with my name on it. In reality, my days were a loop of office gym microwaved dinners and falling asleep to whatever showed next. My parents lived several hours away in a town that had seen better days. My father, Thomas Chandler, used to work maintenance at a distribution center before a back injury pushed him out of full-time work. My mother, Ella Chandler, floated between part-time jobs for years, never long enough at one place to build security. My younger brother, Brandon Chandler, bounced through community college classes, always talking about plans that never made it past the planning stage. At first, helping them felt natural. When Dad's truck needed new brakes, I paid the repair shop over the phone. When the power company sent a shut-off notice, I covered the balance with a late-night transfer. Brandon fell behind on rent once, then twice, and I sent what he needed without thinking too hard about it. I told myself this was what you did when you were the one who made it out, the one with a stable income. The requests never came all at once. They slipped into my life the way interest slips onto a balance, quiet and constant. 100 here, 300 there, always attached to something urgent. Rent, car insurance, a medical bill that could not wait. Every time my phone lit up with a message from home, I felt a tightening in my chest before I even opened it. To make sense of it, I did what I knew best. I opened a new workbook and created a tab called Family Support. I listed every transfer, every bill I had paid on their behalf, dates and reasons in neat rows. When the totals at the bottom started to climb, I told myself seeing the numbers meant I was in control. I made quiet adjustments so nothing would look different from the outside. I canceled my weekly therapy sessions because the copay felt indulgent when Dad said he was choosing between groceries and gas. I brought leftovers to work instead of buying lunch so there would be room for whatever emergency came next. When coworkers invited me on weekend trips, I smiled and said I was saving for something important. The strangest part was how quickly our conversation shrank. Calls that used to include updates and small stories about their days turned into quick check-ins wrapped around money questions. How are you became a throat clearing on the way to another request. I tried not to notice when the thank you messages grew shorter, then disappeared, replaced by silence once the transfer went through. I kept telling myself it was temporary. Once Brandon finished whatever course he was on, once Dad's situation improved, once Mom found steadier hours, things would even out. The spreadsheet said one thing, my chest said another, and I chose the version that hurt less. Working in finance meant I spent days analyzing risk for other people, spotting bad investments and recommending exits before losses stacked up. Yet when it came to my own family, I treated every warning sign as proof that I needed to give more, stay longer, hold tighter. Stepping back felt like betrayal. It took a while for another thought to form. Small at first, then louder each time I glanced at the growing total on that family support tab. Maybe the problem was not that I gave too much, but that all we ever talked about anymore was what I could provide. Somewhere in the middle of one of those late nights with my laptop open and my bank app glowing on my phone, a different kind of plan took shape. If money had become the only language we shared, I decided I would try to speak it in a way that might actually bring us back together. That was when the idea of paying for a big trip first crossed my mind. Not as a vacation for fun, but as a last attempt to reset everything we had quietly broken. As days turned into weeks, I pushed myself toward a plan I believed could reconnect us. I wanted something big enough to shake us out of the pattern we had fallen into, something that might remind everyone what it felt like to be on the same side. A trip came to mind almost immediately, not because I needed a vacation, but because I hoped changing the setting might help us reset what had slowly unraveled. I approached it the same way I approached my work, methodical, structured, careful. I opened tabs for flights, resorts, and rental cars, switching between options the way I compared financial models. Beach towns along the East Coast, lakefront cabins in the Midwest, even a few mountain retreats out west, all went onto a spreadsheet labeled possible destination. I added notes about weather, travel time, and budget projection. When I reviewed the list, one option stood out: a coastal trip with warm water, decent restaurants, and a quiet stretch of shoreline. It felt neutral enough for everyone, predictable, safe. Once I made the choice, everything moved quickly. I booked flights first, choosing departure times that wouldn't require waking up before sunrise. Then I reserved a suite big enough for all of us, a rental car, and tickets for group activities that looked relaxing and uncomplicated. The total climbed fast-passing numbers I would normally double-check before approving. But I kept going, convincing myself that the experience would be worth it, that this time, the investment would bring something back. When I finally pressed confirm, the total stood at $36,000, a number that would have terrified me if the purpose had been anything other than family. After I completed the bookings, I sent the itinerary and confirmation numbers in a long message. A small part of me expected excitement, or even gratitude. Instead, my phone vibrated once with a short reply from my father. Got it. No questions, no comment about the effort or the cost. Just those two words. I stared at the message longer than I should have, trying to read tone into text that had none. Still, I kept planning. I printed the itinerary and added it to a folder. I pictured us walking along the water, sitting at dinners without talking about overdue bills or stressful jobs. I let myself imagine a version of my family that felt simple again, even though I should have known better by then. As the departure date approached, the silence from home grew heavier. There were no follow-up questions about packing or schedules, no mentions of what they hoped to do on the trip. I took it as a sign that they trusted me to handle everything. I didn't consider the possibility that something else had already been decided without me. On the morning everything changed, I reached for my phone, intending to check in about travel plans. I thought it would be a straightforward call, the kind you make to confirm last-minute details. What I received instead had no place in any version of the trip I had imagined. My father's voice held a casual certainty when he said they had already gone, the week before, as if he were stating the weather or the time of day. Only for family, he added, and the phrase hit with a weight I wasn't prepared for. For a moment, I assumed I misheard him. The idea that they would use the trip without me seemed too surreal to accept. But as he spoke, clipped and final, there was no room left for misunderstanding. He wasn't correcting himself. He wasn't joking. He meant it exactly as it sounded. When the call ended, I opened my email, pulled up the booking portal, and typed in the confirmation codes. My stomach tightened as I scrolled through the updated reservations. The names listed belonged to them. Mine was nowhere in the record. The dates had been changed, the guest information edited, the trip reshaped into something I had paid for but was never meant to join. I read through the modified itinerary until the words blurred, each line another reminder of how easily access can be taken when trust has been misplaced. It wasn't the money that unsettled me most. It was the realization that the effort I poured into fixing things had been irrelevant long before the first reservation was made. And standing in my apartment with the itinerary open on my screen, that truth settled quietly, leaving no room for denial. In the days that followed, I slipped back into work routines with a kind of mechanical steadiness. My body moved through schedules while my mind tried to understand how something so deliberate could be done so quietly. I didn't want to replay the moment I discovered the altered itinerary, but it kept resurfacing at odd times, while reviewing a budget model, while waiting for the microwave, while brushing my teeth before bed. The trip was behind them now, yet its shadow sat inside my chest like a weight I kept adjusting to without realizing it. I told no one at work. I didn't trust myself to explain anything without sounding detached or defensive. Instead, I focused on emails, quarterly forecasts, and meetings where everyone spoke in precise numbers. There was comfort in the clarity of measurable things. At least spreadsheets didn't rewrite themselves behind my back. But every afternoon when I returned home, the quiet inside my apartment made it impossible to ignore the truth that had taken root. Something fundamental between us had shifted, and I was the only one who seemed to feel it. Eventually, I opened the support workbook again. I hadn't looked at it since booking the vacation. The total at the bottom had climbed far beyond what I remembered. Every entry told a small story. Rent, repairs fees, last-minute emergencies. Staring at the numbers felt like staring at an unspoken agreement I had never consciously made. A role that had been assigned rather than chosen. I scrolled line after line until the total felt less like a figure and more like a mirror. Late one evening, my phone vibrated with a message that carried a familiar tone. The rent was late again, and the request arrived with the same expectation it always had. There was no acknowledgement of the trip, no mention of my absence, no sign that anything unusual had happened. For the first time, the pattern felt unmistakably clear. I wasn't a daughter being included or excluded. I was a resource being activated when needed. A calm settled over me, surprising in its steadiness. I typed a brief reply and set the phone aside. The quiet afterward felt almost structured, as if a boundary that had never been allowed to exist finally drew itself in clean lines. I looked around my apartment, the unopened mail on the counter, the half-full water on my desk, the soft hum of the air conditioner. None of it changed yet. Everything felt different. A decision had found me before I consciously made it. I opened my banking app and started with the automatic transfers. One by one, the recurring payments disappeared from the schedule. Car insurance, rental support, monthly top-ups, utilities. Each cancellation felt like closing a tab in a browser that had been slowing me down for years. The confirmations appeared in soft colors, quiet and final, requiring no explanation. I changed passwords next, adding layers of security I should have added long ago. When the app prompted me to confirm the new settings, I felt something loosen in my chest. But the apartment still carried the faint sense of being accessible to anyone who felt entitled to walk into my life whenever they needed something. That thought stayed with me until the next morning when I searched for a locksmith in Austin. A local technician named Jordan Reed arrived later that afternoon with a toolkit and a calm professionalism I appreciated immediately. He installed a reinforced deadbolt, then set up a small camera above the doorframe. He guided me through the app, showing how to check the feed from anywhere, how to save clips, and how to adjust alerts. When he left, the door closed with a solid sound I wasn't used to hearing. The apartment felt different after that. Not because the space itself changed, but because I finally recognized it as mine in a way that mattered. The lock, the camera, the updated passwords, the canceled transfers, none of it erased what happened. Yet each step created distance from a pattern that had gone unquestioned for too long. Standing near the window, I realized I wasn't waiting for an apology, an explanation, or even acknowledgement. I wasn't waiting for anything. What came next would eventually have its own momentum. But for the first time, I felt prepared to meet it without looking away. A few quiet mornings passed before anything unusual happened. I kept going to work, replying to emails, and sitting through meetings as if the ground beneath my life hadn't shifted. At home, I checked the door camera occasionally, mostly out of habit, rather than concern. The feed showed the same hallway each time, empty, still harmless. I assumed the silence meant they hadn't noticed the changes yet. I was wrong. One afternoon, as I was tidying the kitchen, the notification tone on my phone chimed with a sharper edge than usual. The camera app lit up with a thumbnail of motion at my front door. I tapped the alert and watched 4 figures come into view. My father stood closest to the camera, arms crossed with a kind of deliberate authority he rarely used with me. Beside him, my mother shifted her weight uncomfortably, avoiding the lens as if being recorded made the situation feel too real. My brother lingered slightly behind them, staring at his phone, restless, impatient. And next to them stood a man in a tailored suit holding a leather briefcase. Seeing them all together like that sent a tight sensation through my ribs. Not fear exactly, but recognition of something inevitable. I walked toward the door slowly, not because I needed time to think, but because the moment itself felt suspended, waiting for my next move. I opened the door just enough to see them clearly while keeping a physical boundary in place. The man with the briefcase stepped forward, introducing himself in a practiced tone. He explained that he represented my family and wanted to discuss recent decisions. His wording was polished, but the meaning sat heavy. My father remained silent, letting the suit speak on his behalf while my mother glanced at the floor. My brother avoided looking at me entirely. I listened without interrupting, letting each carefully chosen phrase settle exactly where it belonged. According to the lawyer, concerns had been raised about my abrupt financial behavior, about the withdrawal of support they considered destabilizing. He framed it as an act of care, suggesting they wanted to ensure that everyone's interests were protected, including mine. The implication hung there unmistakable. The lawyer reached into his briefcase and produced a packet of documents. He said they were prepared to request formal action if necessary, something involving obligations, responsibilities, and financial continuity. He didn't say the word aloud, but the subtext was clear enough. They wanted a court to compel me to keep paying. I held the packet without opening it. For a moment, no one spoke. The hallway was quiet, except for the faint echo of someone's television down the corridor. My father looked at me as if waiting for a reaction he could use, something emotional or explosive. My mother's expression flickered with something I couldn't identify. My brother shifted his stance, bored or annoyed. Inside, the reaction that formed wasn't anger. It was clarity. A line they had drawn without hesitation now revealed itself fully, and standing on my side of the threshold, I finally understood how far they were willing to reach when money was involved. I handed the packet back to the lawyer with a steady moan. I didn't raise my voice or lecture or list the years of support they had quietly absorbed. Instead, I told him in a level tone that any legal matter they wished to pursue would need to go through the proper channel. He hesitated, perhaps expecting negotiation, but I stepped back and closed the door before he could search for another angle. When the latch clicked into place, I checked the camera feed again. They remained outside for a few minutes, talking amongst themselves, gestures sharp and frustrated. Eventually, the group dispersed, walking out of frame one by one until the hallway returned to stillness. Later that evening, a letter appeared in my mailbox. It referenced potential legal action related to discontinued financial support. The language was formal, but the intent carried the same entitlement as the visit. I placed the letter on my table and sat with the knowledge that they had moved from expectation to escalation. What struck me most wasn't the threat itself, but how unsurprising it felt. They had walked toward this moment long before they ever stood at my door. And now the path they had chosen was unfolding exactly as it was designed to. The following morning, I woke with a heaviness that didn't feel like shock anymore. It felt like the start of something I could no longer ignore. The letter from the previous evening sat on my kitchen table untouched, except for the crease where I folded it once. I wasn't confused by it. I wasn't even surprised, but I knew I couldn't navigate whatever came next alone. On my way to work, I sent a message to the only person who had ever managed to cut through my silence, my friend Sophie Allen. We met years earlier through a volunteer project, and she had remained one of the few constant figures in my life, someone who noticed changes even when I tried to hide them. That afternoon, she suggested we meet at a small cafe near the office. I agreed, grateful for a neutral place to study my thoughts. Sitting across from her, I gave a brief explanation of the visit, the documents, and the letter. I didn't embellish anything or search for sympathy. I simply laid out the facts the way I might present a financial report. Sophie listened without interrupting, her expression sharpening with each detail. When I finished, she didn't offer reassurances or platitudes. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulled out a business card, and slid it across the table. She told me the name belonged to someone she trusted, an attorney named Ethan Cole, known for handling difficult family disputes with calm precision. She said he didn't overreact, didn't make promises he couldn't keep, and didn't let people be pushed into corners. That was all I needed to hear. I scheduled an appointment before leaving the cafe. His office was located downtown in a modest building with clean lines and quiet hallways. When I arrived, he greeted me with a composed professionalism that immediately put distance between emotion and strategy. We sat across from each other at a long wooden table while I explained everything from the years of financial support to the recent attempt at legal pressure. Ethan listened with a focus that felt measured, his notes concise and deliberate. When I finished, he leaned back slightly, folding his hands in front of him. He said the situation wasn't unusual, not common, but not unheard of either. Families sometimes attempted to frame financial dependence as obligation, and though such claims were weak, they could become complicated if not addressed properly. He outlined what we needed: documentation of my steady income, proof of my financial independence, records of voluntary transfers with no contractual commitments, and any communication suggesting expectations or pressure. I nodded, already thinking through the folders on my laptop and the emails archived in my inbox. At his request, I also scheduled an appointment with my physician to obtain a written evaluation confirming my mental stability. Not because there was any question about it, but because such accusations once mentioned had to be formally dismissed. Over the next several days, I gathered everything Ethan listed. I downloaded bank statements detailing each transfer I had made to my family. I pulled copies of my employment history, pay stubs, and annual reviews. I saved screenshots of messages that framed their requests as emergencies or demands rather than shared discussions. The more I assembled, the more the pattern revealed itself in clean, undeniable lines. The physician's appointment was brief. She asked standard questions, reviewed my medical history, and completed the form without hesitation. When she handed it back, she wished me well with a sincerity that struck deeper than I expected. I brought the compiled documents to Ethan's office at the end of the week. He reviewed each item with a quiet precision, grouping them into sections for the response he would submit. He explained that the key wasn't demonstrating what my family had done, but demonstrating what I legally and logically was not obligated to do. The strength of the case lay in the absence of any binding agreement, any promise, any legal or moral requirement to continue providing money to adults capable of their own support. Before I left, he told me the date had been set for the hearing. He said we had everything we needed, and that the next steps would simply be a matter of presenting the truth clearly. I stepped out of his office into the late afternoon light, feeling an unexpected steadiness. Whatever had begun with a visit to my door was moving into a space where clarity mattered more than sentiment, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to speak in a way that carried weight. By the time the hearing day arrived, Austin was wrapped in a muted gray that made everything feel suspended. I walked into the courthouse with a steadiness I didn't fully understand, yet carrying the folder Ethan had helped me assemble. The building felt clinical, structured, intentional, a place where feelings mattered less than clarity. That suited me. Inside the courtroom, my family sat together at a long table. My father's posture was rigid, his jaw set in a way that suggested he had prepared himself to be challenged. My mother seemed smaller than usual, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. My brother stared at a point somewhere near the floor, his expression unreadable. Across the aisle, Ethan adjusted his papers with calm precision, and I took my seat beside him without speaking. The proceedings began with the attorney they had hired laying out their petition. His tone was polished, confident, almost rehearsed. He spoke about my sudden withdrawal of financial support, my erratic decisions, my emotional instability following major life changes. He painted a portrait of a woman who had lost her grounding, a woman whose behavior required intervention for her own protection and the supposed welfare of her family. I listened without moving, letting each accusation pass over me without trying to counter it in my mind. When he finished, Ethan rose. His voice was measured, deliberate, free of theatrics. He outlined my steady employment history, my long-term financial independence, my consistent work evaluations, and the absence of any evidence suggesting instability. He presented the transfers I had made to my family as voluntary, not obligatory, noting there was no written agreement or spoken commitment that bound me to continue. Everything he said felt like a restoration of order, a repositioning of truth after someone had tried to distort it. Eventually, it was my turn to speak. I stood aware of every small sound around me, the faint hum of the air system, the soft shuffle of someone adjusting in their seat. When the judge asked why I had stopped providing money, I answered plainly. I said the arrangement had begun as support, as generosity, as care, but over time had become something taken for granted. I said the shift from appreciation to entitlement had been gradual but unmistakable. I didn't mention vacations or altered itineraries. Those details belonged to a private layer of hurt that didn't need to be displayed to prove the truth. When I returned to my seat, a quiet certainty settled inside me. Not victory, just clarity. After reviewing the documentation, the judge issued a brief ruling. There was no basis for the petition. I had no legal or financial obligation to continue providing support. The claim was dismissed. The gavel came down with a single definitive sound. And just like that, the room released its tension. As people began to file out, I didn't look toward my family. I didn't search for reactions or explanations. I walked into the hallway and exhaled as if the air had shifted weight. Outside, the sky had brightened in the way it sometimes does after long stretches of cloud. Not dramatic, just gradual enough to notice. In the weeks that followed, the distance between us became permanent. Letters arrived about outstanding balances they now had to handle themselves. My brother took a job he had been avoiding. My parents downsized into a smaller apartment. None of these things brought me satisfaction. They were simply consequences unfolding in a world where I no longer played the role they had assigned me. I moved into a new place on the south side of Austin, a space with wider windows and softer light. The quiet there felt different. Not heavy, not expectant, just present. I filled my evenings with long walks, new recipes, books I had set aside for years. Slowly, without forcing it, a life that belonged entirely to me began to take shape. Looking back, the story wasn't about a trip or a courtroom or a balance sheet of what I had given. It was about the moment I finally understood that boundaries are not acts of rejection. They are acts of recognition of what is healthy, what is fair, and what is mine to protect. If you've ever had to reclaim your own peace, you know how difficult and necessary it can be.